Good morning, friends. Today we are having a lecture or we are delivering a lecture, recording a video for the BSc SY student, and in that we are studying the plant physiology. Well, in previous video we have gone to the plant and water relation, that is the diffusion, imbibition, osmosis, and so on. So what we studied, that the movement of a molecules or a minerals from a higher concentration towards the lower concentration of liquid form in the case of the plants. Well, moving forward, we study the transpiration pool theory. What is the transpiration pool theory? It is the absorption of water and the ascent of a sap. What is the ascent of a sap? That movement of a water molecule as well as minerals from ground part towards the aerial parts of a plant. So basically we learn in two steps, that is absorption of water and ascent of sap. While the diagram shows, look out at the figure. Here we see the plant which is submerged or rooted in the ground, showing the water molecules in the root cap, near the root cap, and this water or molecules or minerals is absorbed by the hairs which are present on the roots. Well, in transpiration pool theory or in the transpiration, if we talk about the transpiration is a process in which plant loses or oozes out the water. Well, here you see the root structure that indicates the path of a water. This is the transverse section of a dicot root. Look out at the diagram or the figure, the anatomy of the root. Well, you see here the root hair in the very lower part, which is submerged in the soil. Well, when we see, this is the root part which is submerged in the soil, and these are the root hair which is present on these roots. Well, looking at the anatomy of the root structure, this is the very uppermost layer, that is the epidermis of the roots. Then what we find just beneath to the epidermis, that is the circular cells which are arranged one upon the along, that is the cortex of the root structure. Whereas just beneath or just next to the cortex you see the endodermis, which shows the elongated cells and which is attached to the in a single chain. What next to the endodermis? Next to the endodermis we see the phloem. All these cells are made up of a, or called a phloem cells. and the hexagonal cells, which are seen by the hexagonal cells or xylem tissue, which is arranged here. This is the structure of the cell. So what we look here, the water particle or the molecules which is uptake from this root, and this is the passage cells which takes the water throughout this passage. So friends, water is absorbed by the root hair, as we spoke, cell by the process that is called the osmosis. When we look out at these root hairs, these are the trap root, okay, and the root which are seen just attached to the micro hair-like structure which are attached on the lateral roots to the trap roots, that are the this one are the lateral roots. So root hairs are made up of epidermal cells which are present. So you see here that this is the root hair, and which are present on the surface of the root. They also increase the surface area for absorption. So well, what we see here, what is the absorption? The water is absorbed by the root hair cell, and such process is called as the osmosis. So this is what we see the diagram. Airspace here, soil particles surrounded by film of a water. This is the root hair, this is the water molecules, and the air spaces which is present between the root as well as the water molecules and the soil particles. Well, now the pathways of a water. What are the pathways of the water? We see symplast pathway. What happens in this pathway? Through cytoplasm, symplast pathway takes place through cytoplasm, and apoplastic pathway takes place through the cell wall. So there are two pathways of a water transport, that is the symplastic and apoplastic pathway. Well, symplastic is through the cytoplasm and apoplastic is through the cell wall. What we see in this pathway or in the symplast pathway, water and minerals move from the cytoplasm from one cell to the next one cell, but via plasmodesmata, eventually reaching the xylem. What in a symplastic pathway? It takes place in the cytoplasmic space in the cell, and here the pathways or the molecules move through the plasmodata. Plasmodata is the connector or connecting organ or a tissue of the cell which is attached to the adjacent cell, and via plasmodesmata eventually reaching the xylem. Well, next, that is apoplastic pathway, and this apoplastic pathway takes place through the cell wall. Water and dissolved minerals travel through the cell walls, that cell wall which surrounds the plant cells. So, friends, we have to keep these two things in mind, that there are the pathways developed in the cell, one which takes place in the cytoplasm, and the molecules of the water contents move via plasmodata, eventually which reaching the xylem. What next to the apoplast? Next to the so there are two pathways of a water. That is apoplastic pathway and the sympoplastic pathway. Well, one has to keep in mind that via cytoplasmic, the space in the cell space, we see the cytoplasm in the cytoplasmic space, the symplastic pathway takes place by the medium of the plasmodesmata and eventually it reach in the xylem. Well, as apoplastic pathway or apoplast pathway, in this pathway, water and dissolved minerals travels through these cell walls, and we know that these cells walls are surrounded to the plant cells. Well, while comparison of these two pathways, while studying these two pathways, what we see that the apoplast pathways movement through cell wall or intercellular spaces. Now, what is the intercellular spaces? Spaces which occurs between the two cells. Well, on the other hand, the simplest pathway takes place through the cytoplasm but via plasmodesmata. Next point, that is water does not cross the membrane. It means it does not become part of the cell in a apoplast. Water becomes a part of the cytoplasm, that is, or a cell sap. So, the third one, that is this process takes via water, root hair, intracellular spaces, passes cells and reaches to the xylem, that is the apoplast pathway. What in the symphoplast pathway, that is water moves through the root hair with the cell sap, passes cells and reaches to the xylem. In symplast, it is the time consuming pathway, and in the apoplast, it is the quick comparatively to the symplast pathway. Water through endodermis. What is the endodermis? Is the innermost layer of the cortex of the plants, as they are the elongated cells, tissues which are arranged in a chain-like structure just beneath to the cortex and just nearest to the phloem tissue. As Casparian strip, water impervious due to the subarium. The passage cell unsubordinized cells in the endodermis. This allows the passage of elements between the vascular tissues and the cortex. Well, you can look out to these things in this diagram, uh, which is shown over here. Pathway through symplast and pathway along the apoplast. What we see in symplast, we see that it is with the cytoplasm and moves through the plasmodesmata. What in an apoplast, it moves through the cell wall. So this is the Casparian strip which is attached to both the cell, which is denoted in the violet color, and you see the endodermal cell. Endodermis allows symplast only. When water enters the passage cells, it has to move through cell sap. After crossing passage cell, it again shows apoplast movement and it reaches the xylem. We note that maximum movement of water in plant occurs through the apoplast pathway because it is the quick comparatively to the symplast pathway. So this is the vacuolar pathway, movement of water through plants. At the apoplast pathway, water dissolved ions move through the cell walls between the cellulose molecules. Friends, we have studied the different types of the pathway in the ascent of sap, active and passive pathway. That is the pathway of apoplast as well as the pathway through symplast. Well, today we'll be overlooking out all this the structure, that is the absorption of water and ascent of sap. This was an introduction of this the process of the transpiration of or transport of water by the various ways and the various mode. Rest of the part of this unit or aspect will be studying in our next video. Thank you.